basically made a certain crop or products the most important product or the most important crop grown in the United States. The number one export of the United States for a long time, and the South becomes completely dependent upon this one crop, cotton, exactly. And so the invention of the cotton gin, which we're going to get to in a second, actually increases the demand for cotton, and it almost kind of worked opposite as what the inventor of the cotton gin wanted. We'll get to that in a second. But it made the demand for cotton just skyrocket, and so the South just becomes further and further entrenched in this dependence on cotton. But don't think that the North is completely, innocent and uninvolved in this, because the North needs the cotton too. Why? What does the North do with the cotton?
Clothes.
Huh?
Clothes.
Yeah, makes clothes, textiles, factories. And so the other thing we're going to see is a growing separation while the South becomes completely dependent on cotton, while the North is industrializing and manufacturing. So their economies are becoming completely separate and different. At the same time, they're becoming totally interdependent and dependent upon each other. And that's going to kind of create problems. This era is sometimes called the Market Revolution. And so it has a lot of similarities to the Industrial Revolution. Some people might even call this time period some sort of Industrial Revolution. I've heard it referred to as the Second Industrial Revolution, things like that. But either way, we're just looking at some major changes in the economy. And so I want to show you this first, that by the end of the century, so the end of the 1800s, the United States, represented by blue here. So when we start the century, we're right here. And so you can see that Great Britain is outproducing, and on here they're labeled as United Kingdom, but they're outproducing the United States significantly, and pretty much everyone else. Russia's got a lot of production going on there. But by the end of the century, we've become the manufacturing giants. We surpassed Great Britain in the manufacturing output. So this is going to happen in this century. And so this is going to be part of the reason why. We're going to start with the developments in transportation and communication. That's kind of the first thing that happens. Remember, y'all, when we left off in the last chapter, I believe it was in the last chapter, did we leave off with the War of 1812 and the era of good feelings? Yeah. Okay. So after the War of 1812, there's a lot of political unity. Remember, the Federalist Party, the party of John Adams, dies out, and we're really just left to the Democratic Republicans to run the country for a while. There's a lot of political unity, and they want to physically unite the country too. And so what they plan, the leaders of the country, is to expand travel networks. And for a while, rivers were like the main way that people traveled. But the problem with rivers, and I had a pretty good map on the website. Maybe I can pull it up here. The problem with rivers in the United States is most of them run north to south, or south to north. However, I don't know which way they flow exactly, but the direction, you can get north to south. And depending on the way that they flowed, let's say that a river was flowing from the north to the south, that's the way the boat had to go, right? With the currents. It just could only go that way. It couldn't go upstream until the steamboat. We'll get to that. And so rivers were a source of travel, but they didn't get you everywhere. And there were no like east to west rivers, no major east to west rivers. And so this is one challenge that they want to overcome, is how do we get more people being able to travel east to west? And so roads are going to be another way, and canals are going to be another way as well, that they're going to start to connect all of these sections. And so roads, they start to construct like formal roads. They call them turnpikes. And so these were actual, like, intentionally constructed roads instead of just roads that happened to develop and connect places. And they started building this huge network of them. And so the very, very first turnpike was built in Pennsylvania. And eventually they're going to build something called the National Road. The National Road is going to be the first, like, major highway that connects the east to the west. And y'all remember right now the west is like Illinois. That's what we mean when we say the West. Missouri. For a long time, that's like as far as you could get by train, by road, by anything, is Missouri. And so the National Road is an example of an infrastructure project that the government encouraged and the government partly funded to help connect these regions more, because more and more people are moving out here, moving out west. But railroads are going to be the most important thing of this entire project. And check this out. In 50 years, there's just under 3,000 miles of railroad track in the United States, and you can see some of it's even very sporadic, maybe just connecting certain cities here and there. But by the 1890s, first of all, they complete the Transcontinental Railroad. By the 1890s, you can get from one side of the country to the other via railroad. And railroads are going to be the fastest and cheapest transportation. The fastest and the cheapest. So one thing to note about railroads is that immigrants, for the most part, in the North, immigrants were the ones that built the railroads, and in large part, it's going to be Irish immigrants. We're going to come back to that. And then in the South, it's going to be a lot of slave labor that goes into building these railroads as well. Oh, there we go. Okay, just more railroads. More railroads. Okay, but I want you to look here. Compare, in both maps, compare the North to the South. And then again, compare the North to the South. Why would there be more railroads in the North versus the South? How is the North different than the South at this point? Why would they need more railroads?
South is more spread out.
The South is definitely more spread out, absolutely. And so you see that population density like reflected by the railroads. What else? What economically, what does the North have that they'll need to use railroads for? Yeah, exactly. Manufacturing factories. Once those products are finished, they're going to need to use the railroads to ship them other places. And then this breaks it down by region, North, South, and West. This is going to be another reason why the North has a huge advantage in the Civil War over the South, is because they have more railroads and more transportation options. Okay, enough about railroads. Steamboats are going to be another part of this transportation revolution. And here's the cool thing about steamboats. Just a minute ago, we were talking about rivers, right? And normally, if you're on a river in a boat, you're just kind of going whichever way the current goes. Unless you're in a steamboat. And a steamboat, using steam power, you can navigate upstream. And so think about this. A river just became a two-way road using a steamboat instead of just a one-way road. And that's going to be huge, especially when you consider the Mississippi River. I don't know if I have a picture of that on a map. No. Especially when you consider the Mississippi River, it's like the main north-south highway. Well, now it's like a two-way highway instead of just a one-way highway. But steamboats are going to also help navigate canals. These things kind of happen around the same time. And so because there are no east-west rivers, they started digging and building canals to connect the existing waterways. The Erie Canal was one of the first major ones to be built. It takes a lot of engineering to build a canal. This is going to allow the Erie Canal connects New York City through the Hudson River over to the Great Lakes, which then from the Great Lakes you can get anywhere in the Midwest. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. So here's some canals. The Erie Canal's like up here. But then here's the rest of this network of canals. And so now it's like we've created more rivers. And because of steamboats, they can go anywhere they want. And then finally, other than transportation, there was one big communication update, the telegraph. Anybody ever used Morse code before? How do you talk in Morse code? Yeah. There's long taps, there's short taps, so the telegraph is using different taps, long taps, short taps, whatever. You could communicate using Morse code. And so the telegraph came before the telephone. The telephone obviously is going to be hugely significant as well. But the telegraph is going to be the first way that people can communicate instantly, basically instantly, long distance. So think about how important that is too. The ability to communicate long distance basically instantly. So when we talk about the north, the south, and the west, this is kind of what it means right now. All right, the definition of west, even the definition of south, is going to change as we move through this century. But right now, west is going to be kind of anything in what we call the Midwest today. And then when you think of the north, think of like the original 13 colonies like New England. And then when you think of the South, you can also think of the original 13 colonies, but also the South is starting to expand into more west, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. What we tend to think of today when we think of the South. And this is showing population density. And so just like Ace mentioned a second ago, why would the North have more railroads? Or in this map, it's even showing roads and canals. Why would there be more infrastructure in the North? A lot of that does have to do with population density, more people living there, and manufacturing. They need these transportation routes to be able to send their goods different places. Yeah, I always love a moving map. Moving maps are my favorite. So this is showing you population growth, and as it's growing west, so when the map starts over, it resets at about 1790, and then it's going to show you throughout the 1800s how the population grows. And notice it's just slowly but surely moving west. And so again, the national government is thinking, how can we continue to connect these people? These people moving west, they need a way to be able to get goods shipped to them. They need a way to be able to travel back to the main population centers. And check this out. This is the growth of different states. Ohio, for example, in 40 years, went from 231,000 to almost 2 million people. That's an insane amount of growth. So these are all new-ish states to the Union, right? These states are being added throughout the 1800s. And their population is just, it's exploding. Okay, now we're going to look at inventions. And so we've gone through different types of, new types of transportation and transportation infrastructure. Now we're going to look at the inventions that change manufacturing, starting with the cotton gin. I always think it's interesting, without looking at the slides, or maybe you already looked at the slides, if I hadn't already showed the slide, would you guys have known who invented the cotton gin?
Nope.
Sometimes it's just this random fact that like sticks with people, right? Like there's always things I find that students just remember year after year after year. And like one of them is that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. I don't know, we can't name the inventor of other things, but for some reason we remember that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. And Eli Whitney's purpose, so I've read, in inventing the cotton gin was actually to try to make picking cotton more efficient, or it's not really the picking of the cotton that becomes more efficient, it's the cleaning of the cotton. It takes the seeds out of it, which by hand is like intense, very labor-intensive, time-consuming work. And so he thought, if I made this part of the process more efficient, maybe slaves wouldn't be needed as much in this cotton-producing process. His vision was almost to reduce the need for slavery. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Now that cotton was that part of cotton production was so efficient, the South wanted to create more and more and more. And so the South wanted more and more and more laborers to do the picking part of it. And not only did slavery start to expand, slavery had kind of been not necessarily dying out, but it wasn't expanding. But not only did slavery start to expand in numbers, but it started to move like geographically. I'm going to see if I can, there we go. So in the 1820s, this is where most of the cotton was grown in the country. And this is like the OG South, okay? Virginia, that's like the OG South, the 13 colonies, right? But notice how it shifts. Now we start to see cotton being grown in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. And then look down here, getting even into Texas. And so by 1860, this is what we consider to be the South. It becomes known as the Cotton Belt. And then this right here is showing you, this is insane as well, that starting in the 1800s, in the beginning of the 1800s, cotton made up a significant but pretty small fraction of U.S. exports. Check out by 1860. Over half of all of the exports, over half of everything the United States is selling to other countries is cotton. Over half. So when you look at that, you can maybe start to understand why the country might break over something like this, right? The entire economy, over half of it, depended on exports of cotton. And at this point, cotton has become completely dependent on enslaved labor. Okay, a few more inventions. Y'all ever heard of John Deere?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Tractor guy.
Well, that was the first John Deere plow ever invented.
Oh, that's so sad.
That's where John Deere tractors got their start. And so that was called the steel plow. And the only thing that really made it different was this, first of all, this piece of steel right here. Steel is going to become more and more common as a material that can be used for tools, buildings, whatever. And the steel plow just made farming more efficient. It was because like wooden plows would break, especially as the farther west you got, the soil started to get a little tougher. And so the steel plow was more efficient. It was more durable, and it helped farmers to produce more crops more efficiently. And so John Deere did invent the steel plow, and then eventually goes on to have the green and yellow tractors. Another thing was the mechanical reaper. And so the mechanical reaper, same kind of concept. It's a tool that's pulled by animals. But when you're reaping the crops, you're like picking them, basically, you're harvesting them. And the mechanical reaper could do the work of 5 men in a day. And so imagine that as some of these farmers are moving out west, and they're kind of like by themselves in a way. We'll get to that more when we talk about something called the Homestead Act. But these people are moving farther and farther out west. They're setting up these farms. They're kind of spread out. They don't have a lot of help unless they have a ton of kids. And so by inventing these machines that can do more work, they're able to produce more out there by themselves. And so this leads to something called commercial agriculture. Okay? There's a difference between commercial agriculture and subsistence agriculture. In subsistence agriculture, what's the purpose of growing crops? What are you growing crops for? Yourself, exactly, and your family. And if you have a little teeny tiny bit left over, maybe you take it to the market and sell it. Commercial agriculture, totally different. First of all, most of the time, commercial agriculture, a farm might focus on like one crop. Wheat, cotton, rice, whatever. And the whole purpose is to grow it for profit. And then that makes sense because, you're not going to if a family has a wheat farm, they're going to want to eat more than just bread and wheat. They're going to specialize in their crop, and then they're going to trade it to get all the other things that they want. And so everybody starts to specialize, and that's how agriculture is today, right? You don't really have, people growing all the food that they need. You have these huge, massive farms or orchards or something, and they specialize in one thing. So they start mass producing crops. The machinery helps them do that. The transportation infrastructure helps them get the crops back to the other regions. And so that's the beginning of what we call commercial agriculture. There's really no going back at this point. Everything is going to be commercial agriculture from now on. So another thing, and this is just an important point, another thing that's going to change about farming is farmers are going to have to start using credit. Because let's go back to like this, the mechanical reaper. Do you think that all farmers could afford to buy that machine just with the money in their pockets?
No.
Probably not a lot. So if they couldn't, they'd use credit, they'd finance it, just like we do with cars today and things like that today. You finance it. Farmers have to start doing that. And so farmers are also going to start becoming dependent on banks. This is going to be huge, okay? Farmers are going to be becoming dependent on banks, and this kind of interconnectedness is going to shape the economy from now on. Okay, totally opposite of farming, shifting gears here, going up north to the factories. The very first factory that we would consider to be a factory in America was in 1790 in Rhode Island. And get this, the guy who established it, his name was Samuel Slater, he came from England. He had memorized the building plans for something called the spinning jenny.
Yes.
Yeah, it just spins like thread or something like that. It's, yeah. It was patented, it was a secret. He wasn't allowed to take the plans with him from Great Britain, so he memorized them and he rebuilt it in America. And so now we have the spinning jenny in America because this guy stole the idea. And so the first factory system was in Rhode Island, but the first very, very significant factory system, the one that becomes the model for all future factory systems, was in Massachusetts. And this was the Lowell Mill. And so when you hear the name Lowell, think factories, and not just like one factory, they build a whole community of factories, and the workers live on site. A big thing about the Lowell factories is that a lot of young girls went to work in these factories. They were sometimes called Lowell girls or mill girls, and this was an opportunity for women to have a little bit more independence, right? You get away from your family, you go stay in these dorms. I almost imagine them like college dorms or something, except they're probably also exhausted from working 14-hour days that they don't do much. But these young women have this sense of independence. Now, when they made their money, what do you think they did with the money? Do you think they spent it on new shoes and things they wanted?
Yeah.
Maybe here and there a little bit, but mostly they sent their money back to their families. And one thing the textbook points out is that they, a lot of times the money was very specifically sent back to the families to fund like maybe the education for the sons of the family or something like that. Yeah, exactly. So even though women have this new opportunity, for one thing, there's still a legal system in America. Like there's still a system called coverture, and coverture is the idea that when you get married, all of your property now belongs to your husband, all of your money belongs to your husband. Women don't actually have property or money or anything like that. That's still very much a thing in America. And so even though these women get to work and earn money, it's really not necessarily their money to keep or do anything with. But this is the start, right? Once you start to open the doorway to this kind of thing, women are just going to want more and more independence and freedom.
Oh no, not the women. We can replace those women before they take all our stuff.
Kitchen.
All right, so
Kitchen that they don't own.
what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at how these regions, Northwest and South, started to develop their own specialization. We call that regional specialization. Basically, each section of the country kind of had something it was in charge of, something it contributed to the overall economy. And again, these regions are going to become interdependent on each other. And so in the north, there we go. In the north, or right here, it's called the Northeast, you've got they're focusing on industry, manufacturing, and apparently some dairy, milk. Okay, we get manufacturing, textiles, and milk up here in the Northeast. Gotta have your milk. Remember how the middle colonies were called the breadbasket? Well, that's still kind of a thing. It's just expanded west. The West is going to be responsible for the corn, the wheat, the bread, those types of crops. And then in the South, they're going to be mostly focused on cotton, with a few other things sprinkled in. But all of these things rely on each other. It's like the South grows the cotton, the Northeast makes the clothes, and then the West just feeds everybody. And they all become interdependent upon each other. So some statistics, by 1861, so by the beginning of the Civil War, the Northeast had over 80% of the U.S. industrial capacity. Is manufacturing important in war?
Yes, Very important.
Yeah, extremely important for a lot of reasons. It was also had the largest population in the Northeast, but get this, 70% of the population in the Northeast worked in manufacturing. So that just tells you how important and how central to that part of the country manufacturing was. The South, of course, grew cotton, and it wasn't just for the North. We also exported a ton of cotton to England. We exported a ton of cotton to England. And, of course, that was all reliant upon enslaved labor. And it also kept the South kind of stuck in their ways, right? While the North was experiencing all this change and development, immigrants, developing, advancing economy, the South was just looking the same year after year after year. And then the West, again, became the nation's breadbasket. And a ton of immigrants and poor Americans moved west because the land was cheap. A lot of immigrants stayed in the cities and found jobs there, but for the people who are willing to move out west and put in that work, this was an awesome opportunity for immigrants. In fact, the West had the fastest growing population in the 1800s. Not the most population, that's still going to be the North, but it was the fastest growing population in the 1800s. So I'm gonna skip past some of that. So then we talked last chapter. I think this was really part of last chapter. It was mentioned in the last chapter, and it's not really mentioned in this chapter at all. But it goes better with this chapter, so that's why I have it here. And it was something called the American system, and it was proposed by a guy named Henry Clay. Now, y'all, Henry Clay, you're gonna hear his name over and over and over and over. Henry Clay kind of single-handedly saves the country a few times. He does not get nearly enough credit for what he did for our country. But the first thing that Henry Clay does, he's just a congressman, but he has a lot of good ideas. And he's known as the Great Compromiser. He brings people together. So starting with the American system, Henry Clay is like, hey, here's what we need to do if we want this national economy that's all unified. And he came up with 3 things. He said, first of all, we need another national bank. If you're like, a second bank, when was there a first bank? Well, we kind of glossed over that part, but during Washington's very first term as president, during Washington's term, his financial advisor was, do y'all remember who? Hamilton. And Hamilton insisted we needed a bank. We needed to build our credit. It was the only way to manage all of the states and the economy. And people in the North, the manufacturers, the businessmen, they loved the bank. The Federalists, they loved the bank. People in the South, the farmers, not so much. They saw the bank as just a way, they saw the bank as corruption.
Charles loved the bank.
Henry Clay said, and so then the first bank, right, it went away. The charter for it expired. Congress would have had to renew the charter. But when Jefferson was president, the charter expired and the bank went away. Okay, so now Henry Clay is like, we need another one. We can't have this national economy unless we have a national bank. So that's part 1. Part 2, we just looked at expanding the transportation infrastructure. Check, he did that. And then part 3, tariffs. Now, tariffs are arguably, aside from slavery, tariffs are going to be the other thing that break the country. Tariffs. Who do tariffs benefit the most? A tariff, remember, is a tax on an imported good. It does benefit, well, yes, but let's say, okay, think about it this way. Let's say
it benefits local manufacturers.
Okay, yes, like in America, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's who it benefits. Manufacturers. So let's say I'm a textile producer in the North, right? My main competition is probably going to be Great Britain. And so a tariff makes those textiles from Britain more expensive because it's an extra tax on those textiles, whereas the American cloth just stays the same. And it makes people want to buy the American cloth instead. That helps the North a lot. If you're the one that owns the business, then that helps. The South, the farmers, had a lot of reasons to be against the tariff. It hurt them in the cotton trade, cotton exports, because tariffs reduce trade. Tariffs reduce trade. And so the cotton industry suffered because of that. And so farmers are really opposed to the tariffs. So tariffs divide the country north-south. We're going to see that over and over and over again. But it's part of Henry Clay's plan. And so this is just a cartoon. Every once in a while I run across these cartoons that, like, I don't know, they just do a really good job of portraying certain issues. So there's Henry Clay trying to unite the country. We've got to have tariffs, we've got to have a bank, we've got to have infrastructure. And you got the North being like, yes, and the South being like, no. And they're saying the North is going to profit off of the South's poverty. Yeah.
So like, what do you find like the positives and like the upsides and downsides to tariffs?
Wait, what about the product?
Like what's good and what's bad about tariffs?
Okay, so what's good about tariffs is it helps the, like let's say in America, if America passes tariffs, it helps the American companies. Because now I don't want to pay that extra tax to get something from Europe that I could just get from America.
Yeah, I mean, cause that's what I knew, and I was like, that's not too bad. What's like the bad part?
So then the other thing that happens with tariffs is what we see going on in our country right now is it really kind of starts to instigate a trade war, what we call a trade war. If we pass tariffs, let's say we pass tariffs against Europe, then they might pass tariffs against us. And then we're not trading with each other as much, and we as customers don't get the benefit of those low prices. Because the thing that keeps prices low for us as customers is competition, right? But if the tariffs eliminate the competition, that's what the tariffs are supposed to do, is they're supposed to make it so that we just want to buy U.S. products. We're not looking at European products. Then that's going to reduce the trade, and there's going to be no reason necessarily for those American manufacturers to keep prices low. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah.
It reduces trade overall. And so what we see, that's called reciprocal tariffs. When you pass a tariff and then another country does the same thing back, which is exactly what we see happening right now. The consumers are the ones that suffer, really. We see the prices go up and our choice is limited and things like that. Now, if you are in the business, like let's say there's like one of the things right now I think there's tariffs on is steel. If you work in the steel business, that's a great thing for you. But for us as customers who buy things made of steel, not so great for us, right? And so the purpose of tariffs right now is really similar to the purpose of tariffs back then. Right now, the purpose of tariffs is to bring jobs back to where? Here, away from where? China, Asia, Mexico, wherever, what have you. Because if it's manufactured in the United States, it's not going to have that tariff. So the point is to build up American manufacturing, right? That's the point of the tariffs, is our manufacturing has really gone offshore. It's gone to other countries. That's good for us as consumers. We pay less, right? Here it's the same thing. They wanted to use tariffs to build up the country's manufacturing. We want America to purchase things from America, not from like Great Britain, right? So same purpose, yeah, but just today though, people would say, we've moved beyond manufacturing. Like, we used to be a manufacturing powerhouse, but now we don't do that anymore, right? What do we focus on instead of manufacturing? We've gone from farming to manufacturing, and then what's kind of like the next level? What do you think? Like, think about jobs. Do most people in America work in factories or on farms? No. What kind of what would you say is the sector they work in?
Office.
Like an office, a business, right? So our focus is more on like the business side of things, even the technology side of things. We don't need to be making the products necessarily ourselves. We're going to come up with the ideas for good products, right? But they can make them over in China, and we're just going to profit off of it. Mm-hmm. So it's like in America, most people think, why are we going back in time? Why do we want to be, we don't need to be a manufacturing powerhouse anymore. We've moved beyond that. Who wants to work in a factory all day, right? So that's kind of the issue today about tariffs. But back then, we needed to build up manufacturing. And so that was part of the tariff. That's it on Henry Clay for now. He's going to come back so much. Okay. Then this is like not so much about the economy, and this is the very, very last section. It's not so much about the economy, but how society changes around the economy. Or really, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. Like, did factories grow because immigrants came and there were immigrants available for jobs? Or did immigrants come because factories opened and there were jobs available for them, right? So chicken and egg, it's interconnected. But what we see alongside of this economic transformation is this social transformation too. So starting with urbanization. Urbanization just means the growth of cities. Population in cities, I think I have some statistics. Yeah, that's not the slide, that's the Chromecast. That's okay though. Population in cities are going to skyrocket, and this is going to be a landing spot for a lot of immigrants. How much like knowledge, education, training do you need to work in a factory?
Not a lot.
Very little. You have your one little job, right? Your one little thing. And so immigrants, more and more, you have immigrants showing up who are less educated. They don't have very many skills, and the factories are the perfect spot for them. And so that's going to be one of their landing spots. Remember though that some of them also did go out west to farm. But notice some of the cities that are growing the most. In 1820, New York has a population of like 250,000. And then it's showing you by 1860, we're up to like 1 million. Notice that some of the cities over here are non-existent in 1820. And then notice that here they are on the map right here. Cities like Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, these Midwest cities are really growing during this time.
That one, the one in the ocean really grew right there.
And then look at the sad South.
Yeah, very sad.
Charleston was always the most important port city for this region. New Orleans for this region, and they're growing too. And then you have a couple cities on the map in Alabama because of cotton. Oh, there's clear now. This graph is showing immigration. So we go from for the decade of the 1820s. What would you say that is? Like 100,000, maybe 200,000. If this is 1 million, this is like maybe 100,000 to 200,000, maybe. You go from that to almost 3 million immigrants in the 1850s. And not only that, there are different types of immigrants, or they're coming from different places, I should say. They're not different types of people, but they're coming from different places. Up until now, England has been the number one source of immigration, right? England. We were English colonies. Now we're going to start to see people come from Germany, and they're going to be more poor and less educated. Ireland. There's one really, really bad thing about the Irish at this point. Do y'all know? Huh?
The famine?
Well, yeah, the famine does drive them. Yes, the famine does drive them to come to the United States in those huge numbers because, yeah, they got potatoes from the Columbian Exchange, and then they had the potato famine, and they needed to come to the United States. But a lot of hold on. Okay, yeah. The other bad thing about Irish and Italians alike.
Okay, what is it?
What are both Italians and Irish religiously usually?
Catholic.
Yes, exactly. We still don't like Catholics very much
And Spanish.
in the United States. Right now, Catholics are like the main one of the they're outsiders. They're different, and so Irish immigration and then later Italian immigration is going to bring a lot of Catholics to the country as well. But during the first part of the 1800s, German and Irish are going to be the number one sources of immigration. German and Irish.
I'm German and Irish.
Y'all know Texas was hugely established by Germans. Like Germans landed in Texas in huge numbers. Okay, and then as far as labor divisions, looking at what people did for work, there's going to be a growing number, since in the North they ended slavery, there's going to be a growing number of free Black Americans, and they have some opportunities economically, but for the most part, they're still going to be excluded from a lot of those economic opportunities in the North, still being confined to farming and things like that. Then women, again, sometimes get the opportunity to work in factories, but number one, it's going to be low paying, and number two, they're often not going to be able to keep their own money. They have to send it to their husband or their father or whatever. And in addition to working in factories, some women are going to take up more jobs as maybe servants or seamstresses or something like that, especially those immigrant women. And so this leads to this idea that I think is still very prevalent in our society today. If there is a family in which, let's say there's two parents, mom and a dad. If there's a family in which the dad works but the mom does not, what assumptions do we make about that family and their finances? Yes.
The dad makes a lot of money.
The dad makes a lot of money, right? And they have enough money to get by just on the dad's salary, right? That's usually considered privilege, right? When only one parent can work, and you can still, and you have the stay-at-home mom. I think today they're calling it trad wife or whatever. Is that what? Yeah.
No, there's a difference between them.
There's a difference?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is honestly kind of the beginning of the whole trad wife idea. That the woman ideally gets to stay home and manage what we call domestic sphere. Okay, there's domestic, which means home, and then there's public, which means outside of home. And so this idea that women should not be out in public in the real world, women need to be in the home with the children, educating the children and turning them into good American citizens. That idea develops here, and it becomes a status symbol, really. If a woman worked at this time, it meant they were poor. And that was it. It meant they had to. And so this is a way that the middle and upper class start to distinguish themselves from the lower class. And they actually called this, I don't know why they chose the term cult. I mean, I don't think cult back then meant what it means today. But they called this the cult of domesticity. Domesticity like domestic. And so the cult of domesticity is the idea that like the woman was supposed to stay at home and, get this, provide this environment to where when the husband comes home from the ugly, chaotic public sphere where he has to deal with all this terrible stuff, he gets to come home to this welcoming, warm, safe environment full of love with his wife and his children. And that's the woman's job, is to provide this environment for him to come home to because he's been out in the real world. And so we also call it the domestic sphere,
Interesting.
the sphere of the woman.
Okay, that's interesting name.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of these